Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our press conference. My name is Karampetian Kaspar. I am the president of the European Armenian Federation for Justice and Democracy and coordinator of the Europeans for Artsakh platform. Today, we have the honor to have with us three distinguished persons who will present briefly their case, and then you'll have the opportunity through questions and answers have more details and information. I'll directly present you our guests. On my left here is Mr. Luis Moreno Ocampo. He had a distinguished role during the transition to democracy in Argentina 1984 to 1992, and as the founder prosecutor of the International Criminal Court 2003 to 2012. In December 2022, Oxford University Press published Mr. Ocampo's book, War and Justice in the 21st Century, a case study on the International Criminal Court and its interaction with the war in terror. Currently, Mr. Ocampo is an international consultant working for private companies and victims of massive crimes. He was a visiting professor at Stanford, Harvard, and Hebrew universities. Months prior to the ethnic cleansing of the native Armenian population from Nagorno Karabakh, Mr. Ocampo issued a report in which he stated that there was a reasonable basis to believe that Azerbaijan is currently committing a genocide against the indigenous Armenian population of Nagorno Karabakh. On my right is Ms. Irene Victoria Massimino. Ms. Massimino is a lawyer specialized in international criminal law and human rights. She has served as rapporteur of the High Criminal Court of Buenos Aires province, where she focused on institutional violence, police brutality, and gender violence cases, many of which became leading jurisprudence and became internationally known for their contribution to human rights. She works actively in the fields of internal and international conflicts, human rights violations, and atrocity crimes, especially genocide. She is the co-founder and director of legal affairs of the Lemkin Institute of Genocide Prevention, an international US-based leading non-governmental organization in the field of genocide prevention. My left is Mr. Karnig Kerkonian, an international lawyer who currently leads the international and federal practice groups at Kerkonian Dajani LLP. Kerkonian holds an AB magna cum laude in government from Harvard University and 2 law degrees, a JD from the University of Chicago, where he served on the law review, as well as a postdoctoral diploma in public international law from Cambridge University. Karnig Kerkonian is active in public interest matters involving international human rights issues. He presents on matters of public international law, the ICC, the ECHR, and the application of international law in U.S. courts. Mr. Kerkonian has been led counsel in a number of notable Armenian rights cases in the U.S. and international courts, including precedent-setting matters against Turkey and Azerbaijan. Our today's theme will be the rights of the Nagorno Karabakh Armenians and the EU. It will be a conference that will take place this afternoon from 5 to 7 in the European Parliament. Our three guests will present briefly their opinions and views about the rights of the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh. Artsakh is the Armenian name of Nagorno Karabakh. And then you will be able to ask questions and through questions and answer have more elaboration of the case. We will start with Mr. Ocampo, and then we'll continue with Ms. Moreno and Mr. Kerkonian.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here in the European Union Parliament because we need a lot from European Union. European Union was created with the idea to end violence in Europe, but now we need something else, not just ending violence in Europe. We have to help to end violence in the world. 2023 is a year of genocide. We say never again, but in 2023, there's a genocide in Darfur, which is ongoing for the last 20 years. It's a genocide in Ethiopia. There was a genocide in Nagorno Karabakh. It's a genocide coming against Armenia. It's a genocide committed by Hamas against Israelis in Israel, and is a crime against humanity and probably a genocide also committed by Israel against Palestinians, blockading 2 million people. So this happened just this year, and the previous year was the Ukrainian war, no, the aggression against Ukraine. So that is the world today. So we are going to the wrong direction, and in particular because even Europe is now buying weapons and preparing for a permanent war, and that would detract the budget for education, for peace. So we're investing billions in war and nothing in peace. And I think that should be transforming. And I think the European Union Parliament have a role, and we have to see how to support it and expand it. Let me explain why Nagorno Karabakh is a genocide. In August, I made the report showing the blockade of the Lachin corridor is one form of genocide. One form of genocide is defined in Article 2C of the Genocide Convention, creating conditions to destroy a group. After my report, Juan Mendez, who was the first UN advisor on the prevention of genocide, made a report talking about another form of genocide, 2B, which is creating serious bodily and mental harm. And he alerted that was a risk coming. He had the meetings invited by the Armenian embassy in the UN with all the members of the Security Council discussing the topic. And suddenly, in September, the risk happened. The genocide 2B, creating body and mental harm, was culminated because the expulsion, the forced displacement of 100,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh is showing the mental harm. They escape from what they believe will be death or severe restriction of their liberties. So they escape from Nagorno-Karabakh for fear. And some of them, including 8 leaders, could not escape. And they're hostages of Aliyev. And worse, Aliyev is saying the next step is Armenia itself. So it's not ended. And that's why we need something else. I'm glad today the Parliament is receiving us, discussing what the Parliament could do. I believe the Parliament, I understand, has limited authority on some matters, but the Parliament could request to states, to the members of the European Union, if they evaluated the risk of genocide in Armenia and in Israel and Palestine, both. Because all the European members are members of the Genocide Convention. And let me explain that point, because the Geneva Convention who requests to enforce the rules, but the Genocide Convention there is no convention for crimes against humanity, except the Rome Treaty, who is not signed by all the countries in the world. But the Genocide Convention has 153 state parties and requests the states to prevent genocide. And the threshold to prevent genocide, according with the International Court of Justice, is they have to act when there is a risk of genocide. They should not wait for a genocide. So we don't know if Israel is committing genocide in Hamas against Palestinians, but it's a clear risk. So we should act today, not just requesting some little measure. Stop the genocide problem. So stop this. Similar with Nagorno Karabakh. So we need to request, and the parliament did it, request return of the Nagorno Karabakh people to their land and the free of the hostages. Hamas has hostage, Aliyev has hostage, they should be free. And that surely would be the priority because these people are suffering today the crimes. So, and eventually, also, I will not diminish the bombing on the civilians in Palestine because also had to stop it. So, for me, when I was a prosecutor, Darfur was exceptional. It was a genocide, and the world reacted. Everyone was considered it's impossible. Could not happen. Everyone was in agreement on that. They were not implemented very well, but there is a consensus that genocide could not happen. When Gaddafi was committing crimes against his people, there was, again, consensus, and that's why the Security Council referred the situation to the International Criminal Court. Now, this consensus is gone. The world is accepting that national leaders could commit genocide, and it's okay. It's part of the normal life. If that is the past, we are dead. We have no future as humanity. So we need to react, and that's the good moment, and I think the parliament could help on that. I will stop this. So I can explain more if you need, but we have to not just stop Armenian genocide. We have to stop Armenian genocide, stop Ethiopian genocide, stop Darfur genocide, stop what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. All of this has to be stopped now. It could not be normal that we are killing each other. There's no future. My son explained to me, I don't know, you know, Fortnite? Fortnite is a game where the winner kills all the others. So the winner is alone. And that will be the world. The world is going to a Fortnite game. Whoever wins will be alone.
Thank you, Mr. Ocampo. Now I'll give the floor to Mrs. Irene Victoria Massimino to present her case.
Hello. Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Caspar. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It is my pleasure and an honor, actually, to speak today at the conference at the European Parliament. As Mr. Moreno Ocampo mentioned, it's a good venue, it's a good moment as well, and not in the positive aspect, unfortunately. I wanted to add something to what he said regarding genocide. I will not be referring too much to it because I know he will during the conference. But we need to understand that genocide can be seen in two particular aspects. One is the concept of genocide in prevention, and we have a lot of instruments in the international community talking about genocide prevention and the 10 risk factors to identify whether or not there is a risk of genocide. The Lemkin Institute, Baroness Cox as well, with the Argentine non-governmental organization, International Organization for Human Rights, issued 2 reports. Genocide Watch as well issued reports about the risk of genocide. The Lemkin Institute, 130 pages report, fulfilling in a very ample way each of the factors that are fulfilled by Azerbaijan, of course, before the events of 19 September developed. So I wanted to say that there is one concept, sometimes we avoid using the word genocide because we don't want to overuse it. We want it to actually represent what's happening on the ground and the crime. But if we stop using it, we will never be able to prevent genocide. And this is what's happening not only this year in 2023, but in this almost quarter of the 21st century. This December will be the 75th anniversary of the Genocide Convention, actually, and the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 2 fundamental instruments that were born out of the catastrophic humanitarian losses of the 2 world wars and the Holocaust. And we promised at that time, never again, yes, maybe never again to Europe, but never again everywhere. The civilized world, that's what they called themselves in Europe. They said the civilized world obliged itself to prevent genocide. So we have to, when we think of genocide, we have to think of genocide from a preventative concept and as also in terms of, well, proving genocide in a court of law. That is very, very different. And it's also, it has its complexities. But for that purposes, also we have to understand genocide as a process. And I think this genocidal intent by Azerbaijan is very linked to the 1915, to the epitome of the Armenian genocide, actually, of the 20th century, that started long before 1915, actually, but that reached its peak in those during those years. So having made that clarification, I will refer today in the conference this afternoon to the crimes committed by Azerbaijan from 2020 onwards. The limited time of the conference will not allow me to delve on the crimes committed since the desire of self-determination, of the exercise of self-determination by Artsakh or the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh, also known as the Republic of Artsakh. I will refer to those crimes in detail. I will refer to actually the failure of the international community to prevent those crimes, to punish those crimes, and I will propose a few venues on how to move forward now, what to do, like accountability for the past, which I think will be Karnig here, my colleague and now friend, will refer to that, but also to what the role of the European community is, the European Union is from now onwards. To the right of self-determination that has to continually be argued, even if unfortunately there are no Armenians left in Artsakh. The right to return, the property rights, the crimes, the prisoners of war, and the current political prisoners. Of course, I second Mr. Moreno Ocampo on what he said, that this is a never-again situation. We cannot, I thank everyone that is here. I'm glad this is live stream as well. Unfortunately, this conflict has come to a totally second, third, maybe even fourth place. We do not hear of it in the press anymore. And the reality is still ongoing. The genocide, we can call it that, is happening. There is a threat to Armenians, and the escalation of violence against Armenians during the 2020 war and onwards was everywhere in the world. Armenophobia skyrocketed as well, the hate towards Armenian identity. Anyway, and I will refer to all of this during the conference this afternoon. So I'm more than happy to answer questions if there are any. On more detail, I know this is a very strange scenario because there's a press conference before the actual conference, so I don't want to go in too much of detail of what I will be talking about, but in general terms, it will be about the crimes, accountability, and how to move forward with the right to self-determination and the right to return of Artsakh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Massimino, and now I'll give the floor to Mr. Karnig Kerkonian. Yes.
Thank you, Kaspar, and it's a pleasure to be with this distinguished panel here and to be part of this conference. I think one of the issues that I'd like to raise today at the conference is kind of a reality check on the fact that the destruction of Armenian life has literally become sport. It is sport now. We have to really think about that in context, because we've taken impunity to a completely different level. And when I say sport, I mean it's propagated as sport. It's entertainment value for people. And that's a different level of impunity. That's the level of impunity where you feel and you understand that there is no consequence. In fact, it's worse than no consequence. It is rewarded. And so when we think about how the European community can contribute to this discourse, we have to also kind of analyze what the European Union has done. And I have to say, at that point, there are really two tracks. There's the European Parliament, which has made some extremely important identifications of issues, statements regarding the issues. But I think we need to separate that from what the EU executive has done. And what the EU executive has done, and I say this with quite a bit of conviction, is that they have played the game. They have joined the sport of the destruction of Armenian life. And I'm happy that Irene mentioned the genocide, because it has been a century of that sport. And if we don't realize that, we don't see how the EU executive has participated in that game, there won't be any change. not on this. And one of the themes that I want to discuss today at the conference is the fact that, and I'll use some legal terminology perhaps from the civil context, aiding and abetting Aliyev's integration policy in the context of what we've seen was aiding and abetting Aliyev's genocide policy. There is no plausible deniability. You can't deny based on actual facts. You have to actually look away in order to undertake the executive actions that certain EU executives have taken with respect to the Nagorno Karabakh issue. You have to purposely look away. And so I think one of the important things to talk about are the narratives. What are the narratives? How were the narratives used? How was essentially an entire conflict hoodwinked? And I think when we look at those narratives, we're going to see very specific acts, statements, language, fantastic words of inclusivity, coexistence, integration. Who in their right mind would disagree with those things? Because the words, they're beautiful words. People like those words, especially in Europe and the West. People love those words. The problem is the context. There is not a mother in this room, a mother in the world, that would purposely take their children into a situation or push their family into the authority of somebody intent on committing genocide. That doesn't make sense. And if you think that the world, that the law, that the legal framework allows for that, you're wrong. There is no legal principle that says that when there is a risk of genocide, we should be pushing people under the authority, the victim, the targeted group, we should be pushing them into the authority, the military and political authority of the entity seeking to commit genocide. That doesn't exist. It's absurd. But there are narratives that allow that. One of them, and I'll be talking about this at the conference, is this false parity between territorial integrity and self-determination. That this is such at odds, this idea that, territorial integrity is so important. It's really important. And because it's so important, it counters this idea of self-determination, and those can't exist in the same world. Well, I'll tell you something. They've existed in the same world for 75 years, and there's a reason for that. And that's because territorial integrity, the idea of territorial integrity, is not a license to commit genocide. That makes no sense. Think about that. The equivalent in the civil municipal context is saying that because it's my house, I can kill my children. That doesn't make sense. And so when we speak at the conference today, I'll be focusing a little bit more on these narratives, about how these narratives have infiltrated the discussion, how they've moved us away from the core legal principles that should be governing the situation in Nagorno Karabakh, and how these narratives have become part of the discourse and have moved us away from these core principles upon which the post-World War II order was founded. We've moved, and I'll say this, self-determination is very much alive and well today. Self-determination is how the members of the United Nations went from 60 to 190 over the last 75 years. That's how it happened. It's self-determination. So we need to think about what that role is between territorial integrity and self-determination, and we're going to realize that they coexist, and they coexist very uniquely in this particular instance. Because like I said, territorial integrity, that argument, is not a license to commit genocide.
Thank you, Mr. Kerkonian. Before going to the questions and answers, I want to give some explanation, because it's not usual what's happening to have the press conference prior to the conference, but due to the very tight schedule of our guests, we did not have the time to have tomorrow the press conference, so we had to do it today because Mr. Ocampo could stay only one day here in Brussels, and that's why we could not have the room in the European Parliament this morning. That's why we are doing this way. We are sorry for that, but I imagine that all the explanations and the points that were elaborated by our three distinguished guests will help you now also with your questions that we'll have to present exactly what they wanted to convey to you. But before going there, as I told you, we are co-organizers with us. It's the platform Europeans for Artsakh. It's a platform created in May this year. There are participating 14 European countries, the representatives of the Armenian communities. It's a platform which is meant to work and try to support by all means the Armenian population of Artsakh, which is now, you know, it's forcibly deported from Artsakh at the beginning of the ethnic cleansing. Nubar Vartanyan is the representative of the Netherlands in that committee, in that platform, and I'll ask him in 2 words also convey to you the greetings of his colleagues from 14 countries of Europe. Nubar. And then, of course, you immediately go to the questions.
Honorable speakers, dear participants, after 9 months of blockade, imposing starvation, and all methods of intimidation, on 19 September, Azerbaijan unleashed a large-scale military aggression against the indigenous Armenian population of Nagorno Karabakh. As a result, several hundred Armenians, including children, were killed by the Azerbaijani army. The native Armenian population, which had lived in Nagorno Karabakh for millennia, was forced to subjugate to an oil dictatorship with the silent endorsement of all major actors, including the EU. It goes without saying that the Russian peacekeepers bear primary responsibility, yet the EU clearly has had enough leverage to prevent this catastrophe. As EU citizens, we believed that a political union such as the EU, which claims to stand for human rights, would take effective measures to contain Azerbaijan, and that it would at least impose targeted sanctions. When we raised this issue to the EU representatives, we were told that the sanctions would not allow to negotiate with Azerbaijan. So, where have the negotiations led so far, and has this approach made Azerbaijan more constructive? Unfortunately, the answer is rather obvious. One must be naive or ignorant not to know that advocating for Azerbaijan's territorial integrity under these circumstances and for so-called reintegration of the indigenous Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh under Azerbaijani rule means ethnic cleansing and genocide. We believe that the EU leadership is neither naive nor ignorant. Yet, the EU has been advocating for this approach, which is unacceptable by any measure of morality and humanity. Unfortunately, it became clear once again that geopolitical calculations and a few cubic meters of gas from an authoritarian regime such as Azerbaijan, which in fact also indirectly includes Russian gas through Azerbaijani pipelines, supersede human rights and human lives. Nevertheless, we believe that human rights are more than an instrument used wherever convenient and whenever they reinforce geopolitical interests. On behalf of the European of Artsakh, which is pan-European collaborative platform created by the representative of Armenian communities and advocates of human rights across Europe, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all participants gathered here today for this press conference. I wish a fruitful discussion for all you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nubar. And now the floor is yours. Our guests are ready to answer to your questions. Please identify yourself and from which media you are which media you are presenting here. Please.
Hi, Elisa Byrne from Politico. You mentioned earlier during this conference that the Armenian crisis was put behind by the tragic events happening in Israel and Palestine. How do you feel that you can still mobilize at the EU level beside that conference? What are the next steps that you intend to make your voice heard again? Maybe, yeah.
I'm not an expert on European Union. Maybe you should answer this question. But look, but it's normal. That's a problem. Darfur genocide was then replaced by the Arab Spring. Egypt was replaced by Libya. Syria replaced Libya. Then you have the Yazidis and then the Rohingya. So that's happened all the time because we are not equipped to a system to prevent genocide. Because as you say rightly, but Aliyev could be punished, in fact, because Armenia now is member of the ICC. And then there's a precedent, even Nagorno Karabakh is not part of Armenia, because people escape from the genocide to Armenia. That's exactly what happened with the Rohingya in Burma. So they escape from Burma, from Myanmar to Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is a state party, and the ICC open investigation. So it's a case. And the similar will happen against Aliyev. And in particular, even planning a genocide against Armenia is also a crime that could be investigated by the ICC because Armenia now is part of the ICC. So there could be investigation and prosecution, but it will take years. So for me, what is worrying is the even European Union became realistic. They don't care about the interest. They care about getting the gas. And the gas include Russian gas and include the life of the Armenian people, and we don't care. So that, I think, is something we should change. Understanding Europe has to understand breaking the genocide limit is not a formality. It's a matter of life or death. And Europe knows that. So Europe should be more serious on these issues. And maybe the question for all of you even is, why even the media cannot say it's a genocide? Why the media cannot talk about genocide in Nagorno Karabakh? Because states, that's important. The Convention of Genocide requests states, establish a treaty obligation for states to prevent genocide. That's why the states are making big effort to ignore the genocide as much as they can, inventing different rules to avoid, to see what's happening. But for me, the media could do a different work. The media could help. Ethnic cleansing is an expression, but it's not a legal concept. Genocide is a treaty defining what the crime is, and as you say, Lemkin did many reports explain why genocide was committed, and then you can present that, and then start to put the label, proper label. This is a genocide, and it's happening. Therefore, when you buy gas to a genocide there, you know what you are doing. So I think we should start to, and I think she mentioned that, we should start to mention things by their name. The name is genocide. And it would be great if the media can present it.
You can go.
Yeah, if I can just supplement that. First of all, I think it's a fantastic question because really it comes down to, this fight for media time, right? These bits and pieces of space on the screen of people's phones, and how you put an issue that is important but is always judged against other very important issues as well. And I think one of the ways that that it's important to try to do that is kind of taking on what Mr. Ocampo just said regarding the media. You know, investigative journalism is a really important aspect to information gathering, and it's actually important in developing cases as well, legal cases, is that investigative journalism. And I think what investigative journalists should be focused on is individual accountability. Actual people, not necessarily even the ones that are actually the perpetrators, the actual perpetrators of the crimes, but actually those that are assisting those, knowingly, unknowingly. And what you're going to see is that as you look deeper and deeper into the statements that people make in Europe, you'll be shocked. You're going to be finding what I call mental gymnastics. You're going to see gymnastics. You're going to see people do everything they can to avoid using words that are absolutely obvious. So that, why, and this is really important, so that they don't have to take action. If I don't say it, then it's not happening. See, that works in kindergarten, but it doesn't work in international relations. You can't pretend it's not happening because you don't want to undertake an obligation. And so what can be done? I think investigative journalists should be outing these mental gymnastics that people are doing. And there are individuals that are very important individuals here in Brussels.
Do you want to name names?
Well, you know what? I think I'll save that for the conference. But thank you. I will, and I'm not only naming names, but I'll also name the specific narratives that you can hear about. But I think what's really important is to be able to dig into these people, their statements, and to understand what is it contributing. Why is it contributing to this story? And when we do that, we realize how then it becomes an interesting story for people because it affects them individually. And that individual accountability. If you have to think twice, then there's a value there. So I think investigative journalists should be focused on the individual accountability and trying to out the mental gymnastics that are taking place to avoid saying words that will require action. This isn't kindergarten. We're dealing with actual human life, and these people have responsibilities.
Thank you. Just to complement what Ocampo and Mr. Moreno Ocampo and Karnig said, I think your question is, I cannot answer your question. I'm not a marketing expert, right? We face Azerbaijan, who's a marketing expert, actually. And if you look at every piece of news, every interview of an ambassador of Azerbaijan anywhere. I recently watched one of the German ambassador, the Azerbaijani ambassador in Germany, and it's very interesting. It presents Azerbaijan as a free country, although Freedom House, everybody I'm sure here knows Freedom House, has labeled Azerbaijan as not free, with 9 points out of 100, and it mentions the persecution of minorities, not only Armenian. So I think what we do is we need to change the narrative. We need to change this narrative and this marketing that Azerbaijan usually does as presenting itself. And maybe it has cheated Europe, and Europe has been very naive in believing the words of Ilham Aliyev and other officials of Azerbaijan in what they would do and what they would not do. But I would recommend journalists, which they don't have to do much investigation, actually. They actually have to only go to the president.az, which is the website of the presidency of Azerbaijan, and see the genocidal intent manifested there clearly, where Armenians are called beasts, barbarians, that they would be expelled out of their land, that force will fall on them. All of that is clearly stated and in English. You don't even have to speak Azeri in order to understand the communications. So I think, and I second, there are two elements here of how the EU can contribute. One is, well, the issue of accountability. Karnig will speak more about this. There is also the issue of the crime of complicity in genocide, although both international special tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda, in my view, got it wrong. It's a crime of itself, and it doesn't need the specific intent that is required by the crime of genocide per se. And this is something that it has to be analyzed for those who contributed with the facts that we're seeing today, with the crimes that we're seeing today on the ground. And then what the EU can do in order to amend this, right? I will be speaking more in detail of the steps to take forward regarding prisoners of war, self-determination, the right to return, etc. So I think it's two things: the past, unfortunately, that we were unable to prevent, and the future that maybe we will be able to amend and also bring some accountability. So I think those are the focuses that the EU should have, especially having taken the responsibility 75 years ago of say never again to genocide. I think we could do this all day.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to just say one point. One of the for journalism as well. It's even the language, right? I mean, the German foreign minister used the word Stepanakert, and not the Aliyev list of words that people should now use. I mean, think about how peculiar this is in the normal world. Imagine the UN ambassador of Canada telling the world that the word Quebec doesn't exist anymore. We're not using that word. How ridiculous would that sound, especially after he would say that we're going to push the Quebecois into the Atlantic. We're going to destroy them. This is what we're dealing with. And so the language that's being used by journalists, by politicians is important as well. And so I think that there's a lot that can be done in the media. And I think that we should take an example by the German foreign minister to say, basically, I see the narrative, I see what's happening, and I'm not going to accept it. And so I think that's an important aspect as well.
Thank you for your question and the replies. Please.
Yes. Thank you very much. Lilith Gasparian from Armen Press, Armenian State News Agency. Having regard that there is a genocide convention, but regarding this convention, we couldn't prevent genocide of Artsakh people. How realistic do you find the all international mechanism there that we have? And what are these mechanisms, of course, if we have? And from realistic point of view, which kind of international legal mechanisms could work to restore the rights of Artsakh people?
Well,
Thank
we
you.
had to invent a mechanism. We have the International Criminal Court is up and running, and they could investigate the crimes. The Security Council, when I was the prosecutor, the Security Council referred Darfur first, and then Libya, by consensus. Imagine, in 2011, the world was so different that China, Russia, Lebanon, US, and India sent the Libya case to the International Criminal Court to investigate the crimes. Now the world is different. The world will not agree on do justice because everyone is doing war. That's the problem. We need to develop a new system, and maybe we have to rephrase the answer we gave to you, Politico, before, because maybe it's how to help you, journalists, to understand this is genocide and to discuss what should the states do it, because the Genocide Convention requires the state to prevent. So the question is not for the ICC to investigate and punish, but the states like France, Germany, US, Russia, Azerbaijan itself, they have to prevent the genocide. So they have the duty to do it. That's why they are not mentioning. It's not naivete. It's a deliberate intention to not to mention. And that, for me, maybe the question is different. How can I help you to identify what happened as a genocide? That would be the best. That would be useful, using our time usefully. Discussing with the journalist how we can help them to identify, to talk about the genocide in Nagorno Karabakh. We don't see that.
No, yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Following up on what Dr. Ocampo mentioned, yes, the euphemism of ethnic cleansing was created, I think, in order to avoid the use of the word genocide. It's not that ethnic cleansing doesn't exist. It's just that it's not an international crime. It's part of the process that leads to genocide, or that leads to crimes against humanity, or that leads to right? It doesn't mean that because there is genocide, we cannot have crimes against humanity at the same time. or at least to war crimes. So that on the one hand. Your question is very good. I'm an international lawyer, and international law is voluntary. And it applies to actually less powerful countries. It doesn't apply to the big powers. They do whatever. They can refer a case to the ICC, although they're not parties to the ICC, and they have not accepted the jurisdiction of the ICC. These are the contradictions that we have to deal in the world, especially as lawyers. We have no other solution but to deal with these contradictions and not let, as we say in Spanish, no bajar los brazos, not put our arms down and continue the struggle. There are many venues. There is the ICJ case open. There is the ICC case open. There are many lawyers working around. There is this conference, and we have to continue in this path, regardless of the fact that, as you said, well, the law, international law in particular, the law in general is political, but international law in particular is very, very political. As long as we're aware of that, maybe we can achieve with very small steps our purposes and our goals and expectations.
Quick addition to that, I think it's also important to look to approach it from a perspective that is a little bit more appreciative of the reality, and that is, we're not discussing this issue after a human catastrophe. We're amidst a human catastrophe. We're amidst genocidal acts, literally, while we're speaking. The obvious, perhaps the exodus of people from Nagorno Karabakh is a headline. But the reality is, the historical presence of Armenians in Artsakh is being erased today. Words being scraped off churches. Here, I'll give you another narrative. The narrative that Aliyev circulates and propagates, that those Armenian churches are not Armenian at all, that they're Albanian. Now, not countering these narratives is contributing to the there's no fence here. You're either on one side of the fence in terms of the legal obligations, or you're on the other side. You can't pretend. And so I think that we have to realize that there's still a lot of work to be done right now in preventing the destruction of a people, because that's not just their lives, it's their livelihood, it's their culture, it's their existence, it's their identity. And that's happening now as we speak.
Maybe I can help you. When I was a prosecutor, I give you an example how national states think about these problems. When I was a prosecutor, I announced I will investigate the president of Sudan for genocide in Darfur. And the legal advisor of one important country, member of the ICC, because some big countries are members of the ICC, an important country flew to my office to explain to me, Luis, you have to understand, we are concerned about Darfur genocide, but we are a country. Our agenda is bigger. For us, Darfur is also about relationship with China. Darfur is about oil in Sudan. Darfur is about relationship with Africa. Darfur is about cooperation in the war on terror. So we have a much more complex agenda. And you, with your single agenda, cross the entire agenda. So that, I think, is a good explanation of what's happened with the states. And European Union is thinking, also, Azerbaijan, we don't like Azerbaijan destroying Nagorno Karabakh, but we like the gas from Azerbaijan. And if the gas is Russian, it's okay, because it's not, it's hypocrisy. We don't care. As soon as it's not Russia directly, we can buy the gas, Russian gas through Azerbaijan. And that's the way they are thinking. And that's why we needed to say, no, it's not possible. What you are doing is buying gas with the blood of the Armenians. And that will be costly for everyone. Erdogan said that he was supporting Hamas, and he talked about going back to the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire means it's no Israel, no Armenia. So that's the world we live.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes.
Gabori, pilot for that. Thank you very much for this interesting event. As you say, the international prosecution can take time, and the investigative journalism is a little bit limited because of the access to information. What would you expect exactly from the European Union? That's my question. You know, I understand that you want a change of narratives, maybe some actions on the gas imports, but really concretely, what would be the best action in your view from the European representatives and the national governments?
Well, I think journalists, to find this genocide, you don't need a lot of investigation. I'm willing to sit with you 20 minutes, explain why genocide, and then you are done. So we can fix the label of genocide right now, today. And that would be interesting. If journalists can get the idea and start to include genocide in the narrative, that would be a great achievement today with you, between you and us. Then, concerning the European Union, I think the Parliament did the job. The Parliament, I don't know if you know, there's a decision on taking on over 5, no? Very good decision, very good, clear decision. Now is the leader of the European Union Commission in charge. We should talk to her, what she's doing. It's a time of women leadership. Great, we have a woman leading Europe. Please show us how women lead to protect and to make never again reality. No, that should be interesting challenge. But the Parliament is okay. So I would like to talk to the Parliament how we can support them. Maybe they can also help to other states, member states of the European Union. How are you evaluating what happened in Nagorno Karabakh? Is it genocide or not? And then we and you can ask Mrs. Ursula, okay, what is a genocide? What you are doing? Show us leadership. Women, we need women leadership. Absolutely clear. We have her on board. Please show us how a woman lead differently. We need that.
Thank you for your question. Well, thank everybody for the questions. Actually, well, some of the suggestions we've talked about, it's a very good question because there are things that, I mean, yes, we need the recognition of the genocide. We need to address the issue of self-determination. Now we need to address the issue of the right to return. So these are the maybe more longer steps or in time, right? Or accountability in time. But I will mention 3 immediate steps that the European Union can actually take. First is the urgent demand to urgently demand the immediate release of the prisoners. As you may be well aware of the Armenian prisoners in Baku, as you may be well aware, there are prisoners of war, political prisoners, and civilians detained. Many of them judged in Baku in sham trials, with no guarantees of fair trial, and sentenced to from 6 months to 20 years in prison in Baku. So that's one thing that can be of immediate suggestion to the EU. The second is to help Artsakh, that's Armenians of Artsakh or Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh, to register everything they have left behind, to create a centralized body or to support Artsakh in creating a centralized body that would collect evidence regarding the property, tombs, documents, etc. We have to think that these people left without anything. They traveled for more than 40 hours in a forced exodus from Nagorno Karabakh to Armenia proper, leaving everything behind. I met some of them, and they had no more than what they were wearing. They didn't even have time to pick their documents, their identity documents. The third suggestion that I have for the EU is to put together an urgent and independent fact-finding mission in Artsakh that helps collect evidence of the violence carried out by Azerbaijan. And like the UN mission carried a month ago, maybe, I can't remember the date, that came up with a very biased report that there was no evidence of violence against any person. Well, there was no person left in Nagorno Karabakh to actually determine, but there is violence against property. There is many reports done by independent organizations also regarding the destruction of cultural heritage. So I think these are immediate, concrete measures that the EU can take in helping Artsakh.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name's Sandra from Keeping Channels Open, a dialogue network. My question's a bit about deterrence, and obviously that's been failing, and we have the rise in the use of force. But I'm just wondering the links with other cases and how important it would be to prosecute Putin and Russian leaders at the ICC or elsewhere for the war in Ukraine, and would that send a message to other leaders, like about Nagorno Karabakh, for example?
But Putin is already indicted by the ICC.
Right, but I mean
issue is-
to continue with that.
No, we don't need many indictments. One indictment is enough. We need to implement the arrest. The problem is states. First, Putin refused to go to South Africa and Brazil because they are warrant. So that warrant is impacting him. But states are investing in war, not in justice. So the states are not promoting campaigns to do justice. Even in Israel, I'm shocked that we are doing war and not justice. War creates revenge, justice not. And if you want to dismantle Hamas, the best idea is to control the money and capture the leaders. The leaders are in Qatar, are not in Gaza. So we don't need the ICC there. The prosecutor in Israel can request a warrant for the leaders in Qatar and arrest the leaders in Qatar and see how the money is running there. So we are going to the wrong direction to the war, and we are ignoring justice. And justice, in fact, is a way to deal with organized crime, like Hamas, for instance.
To the question specifically about deterrence, I mean, one example you raised about processes through the ICC, but there's another one I think that's really important, and I think that the EU has a specific opportunity here, and that is realizing that they were wrong. They were wrong. That an international mechanism is essential in the Artsakh crisis. International protections are absolutely vital because Azerbaijan is not capable, and this is important because it deals with ideology. It's not capable. The Aliyev government is not capable to govern Armenians without destroying them. This is an important concept. And if we understand that, and the EU understands that it made a big mistake believing Aliyev's rhetoric, there's an opportunity to rethink. And as Mr. Ocampo said earlier, there are a lot of interests. There's no question about that. The argument here is let's raise the bar on the Artsakh issue. Let's raise the bar. Let's raise the issue of international mechanisms, because one of the narratives that the EU leadership pushed down the throat of Yerevan was to lower the bar on Artsakh. Let's not speak about them as a people entitled to self-determination. Let's speak of them as minorities, minority rights, as if this is an issue of, French-speaking Quebecois in Canada or the Åland Islands. And I'll say, these are examples that were used. Wake-up call. Azerbaijan is not Finland. Azerbaijan is not Canada. Context is absolutely essential. So maybe instead of pushing Yerevan to lower the bar, we see the result, because human beings have an innate ability, actual human beings have an innate ability to realize when they are going to be destroyed and are forcibly remove themselves, because that's not acceptable. You would never have your child be butchered. That's not something you want. So they demonstrated the ridiculousness of this idea of lowering the bar in minority rights with their feet. So perhaps it's an opportunity for the EU to now raise the bar. We see what the lowering of the bar did. Maybe it's time to raise the bar.
On 14th of September, the Ambassador Kim, before the Committee on Foreign Affairs, said that the US will guarantee international protection for the right of Nagorno Karabakh people. The ambassadors say that it's time to make reality. So my feeling is, it's a time for all of us to rise, to look for, okay, institutions have to do their job, and we have to push for that. And we as citizens will do it, and you journalists will do it, and that's the way a community reacts. We need to react.
Yeah, my just follow up was that world leaders don't seem to be afraid of prosecution. They don't seem to be afraid of the ICC or other mechanisms.
They are afraid. It's not, no, look, Russia reacted even threatening with bombing ICC. No, the problem in the world today is contradictory. It's like you have traffic light with a green light and red light on at the same time. That's the problem. That's why we feel it's chaos. It's not chaos, it's complexity. It's complex. That's why it's complicated for you too, because it's complexity. Red and green at the same time on. Putin cannot travel to Brazil, cannot travel to South Africa. He's totally happy for that. But it's not enough to stop him doing the war in Ukraine. And maybe in 10 years, it's a case against him. But how many people will die in the meantime? No? I indict President Bashir, but he's in jail, in fact, but the full genocide is ongoing. So it's not enough criminal cases. We need to align leaders respecting basic rules like no genocide.
Here I want to add also something about the hypocrisy of the European Union. They were telling us many times, to us as European Armenian Federation, and also to the Europeans for Artsakh platform, that they were working on integration of the Armenian population of Nagorno Karabakh within Azerbaijan, giving them guarantees of safety and of their well-being. In the same time, although we were telling them that what you are saying cannot be done, as Mr. Kerkonian said, Azerbaijan is not Canada, or is not Finland, or is not Europe, or is not United States. And we were saying them that it will not be possible. Toivo Klar himself, maybe all of you know who is Toivo Klar. Toivo Klar is the EU Special Representative for South Caucasus and the crisis of Georgia. He gave an interview on the radio, state radio of Armenia, where he said that I am saying many times to my Azerbaijani colleagues or counterparts when I meet them, that how you can expect that we can have integration of the Armenian population under Azerbaijan, of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh under Azerbaijan, when you know very well the complete lack of confidence against what could be their faith if tomorrow Azerbaijan rules Nagorno-Karabakh. And he added, European Union or the West in general cannot have a soldier in every house so that they can feel safe and accept such a solution. That's exactly the words of Toivo Klar. He is the ambassador who, of course, advises also Charles Michel when he mediates. Charles Michel is not facilitating, as he says. He is mediating. Facilitating would mean I give them a room and they discuss and I help them to come closer. Charles Michel is presiding those meetings and he is the one who is making the final statements. And they knew very well what was going to happen. And they are accountable and they will be accountable. European Union leaders will be accountable for what they did. They are also responsible. Of course, Russia is basically responsible, but United States and European Union are also accountable for what happened with the people of Artsakh. 1 or 2 months ago, there was a leak of information from the United States that there was a plan to evacuate the people of Nagorno Karabakh. The West will take care, will give them houses, etc., and have them in Republic of Armenia. So we can have a Nagorno Karabakh without Armenians. That's what Azerbaijan also wanted. I have asked explicitly this question to European Union executive. We hear this from the United States. What is the opinion of European Union? And they were very direct. No, for us, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh will continue to live in their homeland where they've lived for 4,000 years. For us is a red line. Those are the words of the European Union executives. And today we see what happened, how they managed to have Russian gas through Azerbaijan, how they managed to have this tragedy for 120,000 people who lived in their homelands for 4,000 years. This was my opinion, or let's say my experience, how they approach to things. And that's why I spoke about the hypocrisy of the European Union. Here I want to add that, and I have always said, that the European Parliament and the parliamentarians honor their duty. They are elected by the European people to serve the European people, to serve human rights, to serve democracy. And we have, after the war of 2020 and all the cruelties that Azerbaijan did, we have 4 or 5 resolutions, almost the same as the ones that Mr. Ocampo said. And if you, we can send you the links of the link of this resolution, then you can see. They ask explicitly, the European Union must take actions, must start sanctions against Azerbaijan. Even they spoke and they obliged Borrell to accept that he will take the case of sanctions in the meeting of the foreign affairs ministers. All the parliamentarians, even they spoke about sanctions on the Azeri gas. The European Parliament is really honoring its duty, and I am proud that I am a European citizen when I speak with European parliamentarians, but I am not proud when I speak with the executive. I am European citizen, I am citizen of Greece. We have 2 million Armenian origin European citizens, and we have the same rights as they have all the other citizens of European Union. And European Union also is obliged to give us answers of what they are doing to our homeland. We can have one. Yes. Yes, please.
So, Aris Nalcı, journalist, Belgahai Radio, Belgian Armenian Radio. So my question is that I'm an Armenian from Turkey, and I see a pattern of 108 years. What happened in 108 years before and afterwards until 1933 in Turkey with Armenian genocide. It's happening exactly the same here now. And I see the narrative of Ottoman Empire and Turkey now. It's the same narrative with the same words, not in Ottoman Turkish, now in English. Same words coming from Aliyev regime. And what I want to ask, that in that time, while Armenians in diaspora, forced diaspora, was trying to deal with recognition of Armenian genocide for 100 years, we lost a battle in Turkey to be able to reconstruct and redemand our belongings, because people, like 100 years before, they left without anything. The papers are in Nagorno Karabakh now, not with their hands. They just remember the street names, like every Armenian diaspora. We remember the street names, but it can just change with just a law. Today is Stepanagar, tomorrow is something else. And Europe was not exist that time, but the governments exist, and they accepted this narrative with the same thing, like Mr. Ocampo said, that because they have to deal with red and red lights and also vert, feu vert. Oui. So it requires more than a political narrative, more than a political effort. And I think it requires that, is there a danger to lose everything in there, or is there a chance that it requires a legal army almost to be able to keep all these papers and to make the demands in international courts, because everybody don't have the time and the money to have a lawyer and to ask for Artsakh cease. Is there an organization for that already, or this is just going to stay on Armenians of Artsakh?
Do you want Karnig start and then go? Or? Okay.
Aris, that's a great question, and I'm aware of the work that you do in terms of collection of information with respect to the first Armenian genocide, and it's almost eerie to actually say that. But yes, there are a group of attorneys currently working to establish an entity that will be looking at this strategically in terms of what I would like to say probably global litigation. And we have, as we know from the first Armenian genocide experience, fact-finding and evidence is useful, but it doesn't really become evidence until it's part of a legal process. They're just facts. And collecting facts, those facts have to be elevated to an evidentiary process, right? They need to be vetted in an evidentiary process and actually utilized in order to advocate and achieve certain outcomes, precedent-setting outcomes. So, to your question, and I'm happy to say it, the answer is yes, and it's a very firm yes, and that this body is currently in formation, and it will cover both civil and criminal contexts and the issues of accountability. And what you mentioned are some of the important aspects of that. One is obviously evidence collection, which there are a lot of organizations that are doing that. But then to take that and transform that into actual legal cases in various jurisdictions in order to obtain individual accountability is something that there's been quite a bit of actual advancement on that point, and that is something that's coming.
I just wanted to add, thank you for your question. I wanted to add to what Karnig said, that there has been a lot of actions taken, not only legally. I mean, for example, last year, a lot of lawyers and members of the Armenian diaspora, and some others that are not Armenian diaspora, actually presented different reports regarding prisoners of war, missing persons, extrajudicial executions, the destruction of cultural heritage, which is with a very interesting analysis of how that could amount to the crime of genocide, given the other facts, to the Committee Against Racial Discrimination that was analyzed in Azerbaijan at that time. So there is a lot done, not only legally, but in terms of reports, interventions, even in the European Parliament after the war in 2021. I cannot remember the exact person, representative in the UN, I think it was a rapporteur or a member of a special working group, talked about, for example, returning that Armenia and Azerbaijan had to return their prisoners of war, right? And January 2021, Armenia had returned the 10 or 11 prisoners it had. Azerbaijan yet has to finish returning those. So we immediately wrote a letter to this particular person in the UN and said to finish this both sidism. This is another narrative I want to actually bring up. We haven't mentioned this, but there is this both sidism, as if Armenia and, of course, Nagorno Karabakh, Artsakh seas, or Armenians in Artsakh were at the same level of Azerbaijan. This is not. The Azerbaijan is the aggressor. Azerbaijan is the one that imposes discrimination, persecution, etc. And so we've been working in changing this narrative for long. So that there is a lot going on regarding that as well. That is not exclusively legal. So it's political, legal, diplomatic, etc. And that's, I think, the EU failing in preventing everything, then now has to act to at least helping doing something, and the international community in general.
Just to finish my part, I think what my young colleagues explained, yes, crimes are committed and it's complicated to control them, but at the same time, you see the news is there are people working, many people working around the world, and that's something new. So I was working in many different cases around the world, and the Armenian community is different because the previous genocide created these generations that are connected with the problem, and they will keep fighting for that. And people like, do you have any Armenian connection? No.
No.
Okay, there are people like her with no Armenian connection who's also helping. I have no Armenian connection. So I think something new is coming. The Armenian genocide is happening, but it's producing reactions. And so we are in the fight. And we are today here in the parliament to see how the parliament could work. But if the parliament is not working, on Friday, the mayor of Paris will help to highlight the problem that she mentioned, those people in prisons. Earlier, people took people hostages, and the mayor of Paris will work on that. So the new thing happening is that in the world today, people who don't like genocides are connected and working together. And what you presented, yes, we need to help the Nagorno Karabakh people to keep their properties, to have their rights respected, we have to help people in jail, and there are many people working on that. That's the news. That's the news. The news is there are many people around the world working to stop and punish and protect the Armenians in Nagorno Karabakh in Armenia.
Thank you. It's time to conclude because we had the room until 12:30. Thank you, all of you, being here. I would like to especially thank also our distinguished speakers, Mr. Moreno Ocampo, Ms. Massimino, Mr. Kerkonian, for the presentation of the rights of the Nagorno Karabakh Armenians. And I hope that with your presence and information that you received today, and of course, we believe that we should have your contribution with your articles, and that you will highlight what you saw and heard about the truth and reality about the rights and the situation of the Armenians of Nagorno Karabakh. We hope and believe that through you also there will be a continuance of our struggle for our compatriots of Nagorno Karabakh. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Ocampo. Thank you, Mr. Kerkonian. Thank you, Ms. Massimino. Thank you very much.